It all started with a whisper, something in the air that hinted at a conspiracy so vast, it could shake the foundation of the global elite. A number surfaced that no one expected, $4.8 trillion. The sheer magnitude of the figure was enough to make the blood run cold, but the story behind it was even darker. Elon Musk, the eccentric tech mogul, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the relentless activist, found themselves drawn to a mystery that was threatening to implode the world of finance, politics, and power. It was a cover-up so tightly woven that it seemed impenetrable. But as their paths converged, they knew something had to give. Musk's attention had already been on the power players pulling the strings behind closed doors. Kennedy, too, had his eyes set on the same elite circle, driven by his unwavering sense of justice and an unyielding belief that the American people deserved the truth. Together, they would tear down the walls of secrecy, but not without facing the wrath of the most powerful people in the world. As they dug deeper, they discovered a network of influence so deeply entrenched that every step forward felt like a dangerous game. The money, it turned out, wasn't just hidden in bank accounts. It was flowing through countless channels, corporations, shadowy think tanks, and secretive deals between governments and powerful industries. It was money laundering on a scale that few had ever dared to imagine, and it was all connected to the $4.8 trillion. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. Elon Musk and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. weren't alone in this fight, both were surrounded by a team of relentless investigators, financial experts, and whistleblowers from within the very organizations they aimed to expose. Each lead they followed revealed a more intricate web of deceit, from rigged stock markets to manipulated laws that served the interests of a select few. But the deeper they went, the clearer it became, this was no ordinary cover-up. The $4.8 trillion wasn't just a number, it represented years, decades even, of coordinated efforts to shift wealth, power, and control into the hands of the ultra-elite. It was the unspoken rule that had allowed powerful families and corporations to shape the world in their image, all while the public remained blissfully ignorant. Musk, who had once been viewed as a radical visionary, found himself confronting enemies on a scale he had never faced before. Corporate giants that controlled the media, global financial institutions, and even political bodies were circling their every move. The stakes were no longer just about profits, it was about controlling the future itself. And as for Kennedy, his lifelong battle for truth had led him into the heart of an international scandal that would rock the very foundations of power. The moment they uncovered a key piece of the puzzle, a ledger, meticulously hidden in the recesses of a Swiss bank, they knew they had the smoking gun. The ledger revealed hidden transactions, shell companies, and names that linked to some of the most influential families and corporations in the world. But it wasn't just the names on the page that startled them, it was the sheer scale of the operation. Billions moved in secret, funneled through legal loopholes, creating a parallel economy that no one knew existed. Now, with proof in hand, they had to make a choice, expose the truth and risk everything, or bury it and stay silent. The powerful elites wouldn't let them get away with it without a fight. But for Musk and Kennedy, the decision was already made. The decision was made. The truth would come out, no matter the consequences. Musk, ever the innovator, knew they couldn't just release the information to the public in the traditional way. This wasn't something the media would touch without being silenced, and it wasn't a story that could be drowned in the noise of politics. They needed something bigger, a bold move, a shockwave that would force the world to listen. Kennedy, with his long history of speaking truth to power, was ready to fight. Together, they made their first move, a televised press conference that would reveal everything. The world's eyes would be fixed on them, and they knew it. The elites, however, weren't about to let this happen without retaliation. Just hours before the press conference was scheduled, their entire operation was hit. Financial accounts were frozen, bank records mysteriously vanished, and their team of whistleblowers were targeted in a series of accidents that looked anything but accidental. The elites were moving fast to cover their tracks, and they were pulling every string they had to silence Musk and Kennedy. But they weren't prepared for what was coming next. In a bold act of defiance, Musk used his power over technology. He orchestrated a global data dump, unleashing the stolen ledger, along with documents, emails, and videos, on every social media platform, every news outlet, every device that could be connected to the internet. It was an unprecedented move, a digital attack that couldn't be undone. Within moments, the world was flooded with the truth. The names, the transactions, the backdoor deals, everything was laid bare. Powerful figures in government, tech, finance, and beyond were implicated. It was a gamble of monumental proportions, and Musk knew the consequences would be severe. But there was no turning back now. As the revelation spread, the elites were cornered. Public outcry was immediate. Protests erupted in major cities around the world. Calls for investigations, for accountability, and for justice grew louder by the second. Musk and Kennedy had ignited a firestorm, but the question now was, would they be able to survive the fallout? The moment the truth exploded across the world, the response was swift and ruthless. The elites, caught off guard by the sheer volume and public impact of the revelations, immediately launched a counteroffensive. They mobilized their vast resources, media outlets, lobbyists, shadowy political operatives, to control the narrative. Disinformation flooded the airwaves, attempting to discredit Musk and Kennedy, labeling them as traitors, conspiracy theorists, or even agents of foreign powers. But it wasn't enough. The public was already outraged, and no amount of spin could stop the tide of anger that had been unleashed. People took to the streets, demanding accountability for the vast sums of money that had been siphoned off for the benefit of a tiny, powerful minority. The international financial markets began to waver as the world grappled with the truth of just how deeply entrenched the corruption had become. Kennedy's voice rang loudest in the chaos. As the grandson of a man who had fought against corruption, he spoke with the righteous fury of someone who had always known that the system was broken. He called for global investigations, for the arrest of those responsible, and for sweeping reforms that would ensure such a scandal could never happen again. But even as the calls for justice grew louder, the elites were planning their next move. Behind closed doors, the powerful families whose names had been exposed in the leak were meeting urgently. Their connections ran deep, into law enforcement, intelligence agencies, and international governments, and they weren't about to let a pair of outspoken activists destroy everything they had spent decades building. Musk and Kennedy were now targets. They knew they couldn't stay in the spotlight for too long without becoming a threat to the very fabric of society, as the elites would see it. With the media already on the attack, they had no choice but to go underground. Safe houses were set up, encrypted communications were established, and even their closest allies had to disappear into the shadows. But even in hiding, they were relentless. Musk used his control over global satellite networks to leak more data, exposing ties between the corrupt elites and government officials, as well as hidden offshore accounts that were just the tip of the iceberg. The more they exposed, the more dangerous it became. The world was watching. The elites were scheming. And Musk and Kennedy were preparing for the final confrontation. The world was on edge. The elites were making their moves, desperately trying to patch up the holes that had been blown wide open. The media was still pushing their narrative, but the cracks in the story were too wide to be ignored. More and more people were starting to wake up to the true scale of the scandal. Calls for reform were echoing from every corner of the globe, but the elites were not going down without a fight. Elon Musk and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. knew their lives were in grave danger, but they had a plan, one final, audacious strike that would change everything. They had the truth, and they had the power to amplify it in ways that no one could have ever imagined. But the risks were enormous. The elites wouldn't let them expose everything without trying to destroy them first. Their final move came at a UN conference. Kennedy had been invited to speak as part of a special panel on global corruption, a position he'd only agreed to under extreme duress, knowing that it would be the perfect place to drop the final bombshell. Musk, operating in the background, was preparing to launch the next phase of their plan, a live global broadcast that would leave no room for denial. In the middle of Kennedy's speech, as world leaders and diplomats gathered in the massive conference hall, the lights flickered, then went out. Panic surged through the crowd as emergency alarms blared. The elites had tried to shut it down, through technology, through sabotage, and through intimidation. But they weren't fast enough. Musk had anticipated this. He'd hacked into the UN's communications network, and within seconds, screens across the world lit up with a live broadcast, Musk himself standing in front of a massive screen filled with names, dates, and staggering financial transactions. It was the final piece of the puzzle, a comprehensive web of corruption, manipulation, and theft that tied every elite family, every major corporation, and even government officials directly to the $4.8 trillion. The broadcast didn't just reveal the names of those involved, it showed how they had orchestrated wars, manipulated elections, and leveraged the global economy to further their own power. It was a visual representation of the depths of the conspiracy, and it was being broadcast to billions in real time. As the footage continued to roll, the tension in the room was palpable. The public was watching, the elite leaders in the hall were frozen, and those who had been caught in the web of deception were scrambling for cover. There was no turning back now. Musk and Kennedy had put everything on the line. But there was still one more bombshell. As the final clip played, a shocking revelation came to light. One of the most influential leaders in the world, whose name had never before been linked to the scandal, was the mastermind behind the entire operation. It was a name no one had expected, the sitting U.S. president. The name flashed across the screen, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. The room at the UN was in chaos, whispers turning into shouts, fingers pointing, and cameras flashing as world leaders realized the magnitude of what they were witnessing. The sitting U.S. president, a figure who had managed to remain untouchable for years, was the architect behind the entire $4.8 trillion conspiracy. His connections, his secret deals, his manipulation of international power, everything had been orchestrated with precision. And now, it was all laid bare for the world to see. Musk and Kennedy's final act of defiance had shattered the illusion of control. As the president's name and face lingered on the screen, the ramifications rippled outward. The elite leaders, who had spent decades pulling strings from behind closed doors, suddenly looked vulnerable. They weren't untouchable anymore. The enormity of the scandal forced every nation to confront the truth. Their highest officials, their wealthiest businessmen, and their most powerful institutions had been complicit in a scheme that had cost the world trillions. The president's office immediately went into damage control mode. The White House denied the claims, calling it a coordinated attack on democracy. But the evidence was overwhelming. Financial documents, emails, and even direct recordings of high-level meetings surfaced, confirming that the president had been deeply involved in the manipulation of global finance, wars, and even electoral processes to keep the elites in power. But it wasn't just the president who was in the spotlight. The exposure of this global conspiracy sparked a movement, a revolution of sorts, demanding accountability for the corrupt elites who had profited at the expense of the common people. Protests broke out in every major city, from New York to Paris, from Tokyo to Berlin. People who had long felt helpless, oppressed, and invisible now had a target. The corrupt system was no longer just a theory. It was a reality, and they were demanding justice. Kennedy, now a symbol of resistance, was propelled to the forefront of the global conversation. His speeches became rallying cries for the disenfranchised, the people who had suffered under the weight of the elite's manipulation. He called for the president's immediate resignation, for the arrest of those involved, and for the creation of a global tribunal to prosecute the guilty parties. As for Musk, he wasn't just the tech mogul anymore. He had become a leader in this new age of transparency. His efforts to expose the corruption had thrust him into the global limelight, and he knew there was no going back. He had made powerful enemies, and now they would come for him. But he didn't care. The battle had just begun. In the midst of the chaos, a startling realization dawned: the U.S. president wasn't the only one who had been compromised. The elite's web extended into every facet of global power. The fight to expose the truth would take years, decades, perhaps, but the first crack in the system had been made. The dominoes were beginning to fall. As the broadcast ended, Kennedy stood at the podium, his voice steady but filled with emotion. This is not just about exposing the corrupt. It's about rebuilding a world where the people, all people, have the power to shape their own future. The revolution had begun. The world was forever changed. The fallout from the revelation spread like wildfire, and the ripple effects reached every corner of society. The elites who had once controlled the world from behind closed doors now found themselves under siege. Their wealth, their power, their very status had been built on lies, and now those lies were exposed for all to see. The president, once an untouchable figure, was now under investigation. Calls for his resignation were deafening, and the pressure from within his own party became insurmountable. The White House's desperate attempts to downplay the scandal were no longer enough. Public trust had evaporated, and the nation was plunged into a political crisis. But it wasn't just the president who was feeling the heat. Governments around the world, led by leaders who had long been complicit in this global conspiracy, faced mounting demands for accountability. In Europe, Asia, and South America, citizens took to the streets in mass protests, united by a singular cause, justice. Kennedy's voice, which had once been a lone cry in the wilderness, was now a rallying cry for millions. His speeches were broadcast around the world, inspiring a movement that transcended borders and ideologies. People from all walks of life, from the poorest communities to the most influential corners of society, united under the banner of truth and transparency. The global establishment was crumbling, and they were watching it all unfold, powerless to stop it. Musk, too, was a central figure in this new world. His actions had ignited the spark, but it was his commitment to ensuring that the truth would never again be buried that made him a symbol of the resistance. As he continued to leverage his technological empire, he worked tirelessly to expose the remaining secrets, unveiling new layers of corruption, illegal financial practices, and covert deals between governments and the powerful corporations that had shaped global events for decades. But as the battle for justice raged on, the elites fought back with everything they had. Powerful figures in the intelligence community, former world leaders, and corporate giants conspired to find a way to regain control. They knew that this was a fight to the death, their death as the uncontested masters of the world's wealth and power. Yet, the movement had gained too much momentum. With each passing day, more allies joined the cause. Whistleblowers, activists, and everyday people from across the globe came forward, armed with the courage to confront the corrupt system that had kept them down for so long. The elite's attempts to divide and conquer were failing. In the final days, the president, cornered and facing mounting pressure, had no choice but to step down. The global political landscape shifted forever, as new leaders, unafraid to challenge the system, took their place. But the fight didn't end there. The revolution was not just about bringing down the old order, it was about building something new. A new system of governance. A new way of dealing with wealth and power. One that prioritized transparency, fairness, and the collective good over the interests of the few. Kennedy's words echoed across the world, reminding everyone, this is just the beginning. A new era is dawning. It's our time now. We the people will take back what's ours. And with that, the world began to rebuild, not under the shadow of powerful elites, but in the light of truth, justice, and a collective will to make things right. The revolution had won. The elites had lost. And the world would never be the same again.